Two White Ladies. I am Brandy Wilson, and this is a podcast. And currently, we're calling it Two White Ladies. Two White Ladies. I know might change later on, might not. If I need to qualify anything, I have a master's degree in sociology and a whole lot of other lessons in life. And my co-host is.
I'm Jessica Smith, and I also have a master's degree in sociology, if that matters. I've learned some things, I can talk about some things, and I'm excited that I get to talk about them and learn more with Brandy.
A little bit about what we actually do expect in our comment section, because we have some experience with comment sections, and they can turn to the ninth circle of hell quite easily and quickly. And that isn't going to happen here. You are free to do and say as you please. However, we are also free and will uphold our boundaries, which are: do not come for people. Jessica suggested you can come for ideas, but do so constructively. There's no name calling. There's no doxing. There's no
threats of violence.
Threats of violence. Yeah, what else?
Just be a decent human, right? Like, we all want the opportunity to say our piece, to be heard, and part of being heard is also listening. So I think, again, really reiterating this idea of like, you don't have to agree with everything we say. Hopefully you think critically about it, and maybe you get some new information and it changes your mind. But like, if you're just not there yet, or you're still learning and it's like, wrestling around in your brain with like current thoughts and beliefs that you have, like, you can work that out in the comments. You have some like constructive dialogue, just like, yeah, don't be mean. Don't say mean things about people, us or anyone else in the comment section.
It's true. Or you will not have access to it anymore. Today, our episode 1 is really working through some of the differences between prejudice and racism, and really looking more into prejudice. There's a lot of things around race and equity and groups of people and things that white people and like dominant culture people need to think about, look at, explore, and understand maybe some of its bad form. And that is the intention of this space. From my perspective, the intention is never to speak on like Black culture or Black history, or that's just what's in my head. Or cultures or people that are not ones that I belong to, right? So we will touch on topics that affect groups of people, but we're really going to focus on our craptastic behaviors and reproductions of systems and things. And we are going to try to make it not preachy, and hopefully sometimes a little cheesy, because some of the stuff that we do is really dumb. And
Prejudice, today's show topic.
yes. Okay. So to start, this episode 1 is about prejudice, racism. Jessica, would you like to take us in and maybe talk a little bit about what? You just start.
I'm starting. All right. So we're gonna dive into sort of, more like definitions and really explaining these topics. But I think like starting with prejudice is maybe a little more of a gentle intro, right? Like, people hear racism or white supremacy and they kind of like freeze, especially us white people, right? It's like, oh God, you're talking about me. You're telling me how horrible and bad and wrong I am. And it's like, everybody take a breath. And when we are talking about those things, we're talking about big structural like issues, right? And that takes a lot of brain space for us to talk about like structural systemic problems, how it like kind of trickles down and impacts all people. I think prejudice is a little bit easier to digest at first because we all have it. I'm sure you can think about some stereotypes and beliefs about a person, a group of people that you have held in the past that maybe you hold right now. And it's broader than just race, right? So again, race can be a very, very tricky topic. But prejudice, we have a slide. We have some things to show you.
I have a slide. This might help.
Hey!
These are some general examples. That is my slide.
This is it. So again, prejudice, we can be talking about race, but we can also be talking about gender, nationality, social status, right? Class, sexual orientation, religious affiliation, body size, not just race, but like color, like colorism. So like, it's deep, right? Like it's covers a lot of things, and we can have these ideas that then turn into kind of like shitty actions. So we're gonna maybe talk about how this kind of like shows up sometimes with certain people and in certain movement spaces as well. Yeah, and you'll hear us say us a lot and we a lot because we, the white people, we're not like free of the silliness or mistakes that are made. And so, we're constantly learning and growing as well. And to Brandy's point, we're not here to like preach at you all and tell you should do this and you shouldn't do that. But we might offer up some examples of like ways to just maybe try some different things out, reconsider, think critically about what is going on, your own sort of thoughts and feelings and prejudices. We're going to talk about today a little bit. And again, like reflect on it ourselves, right? Like this is a self-reflective podcast as well. Things will come up for us that we'll be able to share so that it's not so much of a us and you out there. It's all of us together, and we are definitely not pretending to be experts. We just want to have this conversation. And yeah. Do you want to use another slide, or because you have the definitions? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'll read this and then we'll freeform.
Okay.
So that at any time you can pause and read this. You can print it out, put it in your pocket for if ever you need it. Also, this resource will be down in the description of the show, along with a bunch of others that we felt might be good for today. All right, so prejudice, as described by this source, is a prejudgment or unjustifiable and usually negative attitude of one type of individual or group toward another group and its members. Such negative attitudes are typically based on unsupported generalizations or stereotypes that deny the right of the individual members. For example, people who use drugs cannot function and hold jobs. That is a prejudice. One that has been screamed at me. And that can be held toward anyone, right? It's not about, it can be about your skin, but it doesn't have to be about your skin. It can be about what you do for a living. It can be about who you're dating. It can be about all sorts of things. Your ability, your body size, what shows you watch. I don't know. Someone could watch some really horrible show like the Kardashians, and people might judge them and have a prejudice that they're like a shallow jerk face. They may or may not be, but hey, that's a judgment. Okay. All right, so then racism. Racism involves one group having the power to carry out systematic discrimination through the institutional policies and practices of the society and by shaping the cultural beliefs and values that support those racist policies and practices. Okay. So
those, you'll see those words in there again, right? That I mentioned: systemic, institutional, and power is the big one, right? Like I that's what I tend to think is sort of the primary distinguisher between prejudice and racism, is that prejudice can go in all of the directions, right? Like you can have no power and have prejudice against somebody with power, and it's just like not going to shift the power dynamic. But with racism, and also like it's obviously focused just on race and not other identities, but the power piece, right? It's maybe we'll talk at another episode about reverse racism and the myth of reverse racism. But the gist of that is that like the power piece and sort of like the dominant culture, that is like when we see racism show up, right? So again, we're going to probably take another episode to unpack that, because it is a lot and we're just easing ourselves in here today.
yeah, and there's a lot of like you said, reverse racism and all of that shenanigans. But we want to draw you in before we chase you off. So we'll delve deeper into racism when you either are so invested because you can't stand us and want to talk back, or that you're like, oh yeah, maybe whatever, right? For me, the racism is it's one group having the power to carry out the systematic discrimination. That feels like all of it almost for me. Like there is one group who made the system that revolves around their power and that protects their power and their system. And so there's only one of those in this country. And that might be episode 7. I don't know. But we're going to go back to prejudice.
You explained that much better than I did. Thank you.
Really? I just repeated it. Where do you want to go from here about prejudice? Why are we talking about it?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're talking about it because we were making a list of topics, and I think Jessica was like, I'm dealing with this one a lot right now. And I think that's how it became the first one. And then it's just a good place to start.
Yeah, I think it can oftentimes be conflated with racism, or folks who experience prejudice and discrimination but maybe are not Black or a person of color. When we talk to them about whiteness and white privilege, those things might not necessarily resonate, because they're like, well, wait, I've experienced this kind of prejudice. Like I grew up in a neighborhood and I was the minority and I got mistreated because of that. Or I grew up poor and, I was poor but not quite poor enough so I couldn't get a scholarship. Or, all of the ways that like, yes, your experience in discrimination and prejudice is real, and maybe it inhibited you in certain ways, or even landed you in jail, like had you interacting with these institutions and systems which are unjust. And yet there are parts likely of your identity, if you are a white person, that kept you safe, that didn't make your life more difficult, because not only were you poor and queer, but now you're also Black, right? You add in that extra layer of race and it just makes the prejudice greater, right? More extreme. It's just like one more identity that is certainly not helping you. And so, yeah, I think in that way, like acknowledging people's rough lives that they have experienced, not denying, that you have experienced, you have these identities that maybe have resulted in prejudice, but just showing the ways that at the same time you can still have some level of privilege, right?
For example, um, I grew up in trailers, rural, not very much money, and ended up in jail. Um, and ended up with felonies, right? But when I sit and talk to colleagues who have very similar life situations around like class and engagement with law enforcement, the outcome isn't the same. So yes, I did time. Yes, I, was mandated to a million different programs, right? That is a blessing, a white blessing, right? Oh, she's just struggling. She clearly needs drug court. Whereas I work with people who may have done much less than I have and spent hard time in prison because they were black, and for no other reason. And I saw those things happening around me. Um, there are instances where the police probably should have killed me and would have if I did not look the way I do. And that is one of the biggest things about racism and like prejudice within the different identities or groups that we belong to. You can't take race off. So, like, I cannot look like a girl that grew up in a trailer. I cannot look like a felon. I cannot look like an atheist. I cannot look like a queer woman, I think. And so you cannot look like all those, so you can pass, right? You can pass through all these spaces that might be really dangerous for people that can't take certain identities off, because it's intrinsic to like their experience in life. And like sometimes it's the really dumb things, and I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. A prejudice I have. Absolutely religious affiliation. I have to check myself frequently. And sometimes prejudice comes out of like feeling a need for safety, right? And we may not know that. For me, a lot of the religious stuff comes around my prejudice around it comes out of a feeling of need for safety from historical things that have happened with religious situations and myself. Um, but I know that because I've taken the time to be like, why? Why do I have this like physical reaction in myself? And why do I just automatically have these feelings about people that I don't know? Um, and luckily, I met this lovely human here. Um, First day I met her, she said, "I love Jesus," and I was like, "Oh God." I was like, "Oh, that's good." And she is definitely one of my favorite people, and has made me like just by not being a horrible person and the whole like I love Jesus, um, has made me like at least put some space between my prejudice and immediate judgment of people when they're like, I am blah 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 religion. Um, shall we talk about some more everyday prejudice?
Yeah. Oh, I just had one in my brain and then it disappeared. Let me see if it'll come back to me. Damn it. It was a good one too. Well, a good one. I know there are other ones that we want to talk about, but I was going to start with that one. Shit. Oh, okay. So this prejudice is kind of funny because like I am this person. Like I have made it to the middle class. I have a retirement account, I have a savings account, I have a chunk of money in my checking account. I go out to eat all the time. Like I do not have to worry about financial security. And I meet another middle class white person and I judge the shit out of them. I judge the shit out of them. I'm just like, fuck your money. And I'm like, wait, bitch. Wait just a minute. Um, you're there too. And you know, I go, well, I do mutual aid and I give money and like, I have to have this money so that I can support my community. And like, yes, valid. And also, like, I don't know if this fucking person that I'm meeting for the first time is, like, I don't know anything about them. And I might not even actually know, like, their class or their financial stability or instability, right? Like, lots of people, can pass, like Brandy was saying, and they do it for safety reasons. They do it for their self-esteem, like whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. But yeah, I think as a person who believes in fighting against fucked up systems and believes in fighting against capitalism, like I wrestle with like, okay, you're a financially stable middle class person and like grr to all the other people like you, right? And so I have to remind myself like, yeah, if you're stable in that way, it doesn't make you a bad person. You can do good things and educate yourself and, transfer your wealth in all of the ways. And other people like you might be doing the same thing.
Yeah, it gives you the opportunity to have resources to share. I find myself doing that a lot too. My human reminds me.
Yep, mine too.
Like, yeah. In fact, my mom, she was like, "Oh, this person, blah 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 blah," and I got real snarky and ugly about this uppity person who has always judged me, so I judged them incredibly hard. And usually I don't take my mom's feedback, but this one, she was like, well, not everyone can be perfect like you. Not. And so then I had to sit and think about that and was like, all right, maybe some of that is just sort of like old petty bitter. And that's the other thing. A lot of times our prejudice against a whole group can come from our personal, bitter, ugly internal crap about one person.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was making me think also about like values, right? Like I think we hold so tightly to our values, especially this day in society, because like values have become so polarizing. And so like, yeah, when we maybe meet somebody or have like a stereotype or a belief about somebody that like really crashes and clashes with our values, like I think it can make that prejudice even more extreme, even if like there's no truth to it, right? Or again, like we're basing it off like our experience of one person, and then we're saying, oh, all people are like this, or oh, I just met you, but surely you must be this way, because this identity that I think you have like clashes with my core beliefs and values.
And I think that leads us into some everyday prejudice.
Are we gonna have captions?
Yes, because access is important. Ooh. Shall I play this 43-second video clip?
Yeah.
Phillips.
Donald Trump wasn't the only one making questionable statements tonight. Listen to Secretary Clinton at a fundraiser here in New York.
Be grossly generalistic. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. But that other basket of people are people who feel the government has let them down, the economy has let them down, nobody cares about them.
What she doesn't know, a lot of times, out here in deplorable lands, in the Midwest, a lot of times, people that don't like the government, uh, and who voted for Trump, but also may not be racist, but maybe like, whoa, that got a little weird, wanted something different. How do I know this? Because I live here.
Oh, one of the things that it's very easy, and I'll speak from experience as a coastal person. One of the things that is very easy for coastal people, from my experience of being one, is that we can easily say, fuck the South, fuck Midwesterners. But one of the things we don't understand is the lack of access to education, the lack of access to technology, the lack of access to upward mobility, even within white communities. So when we say that, it's actually a really classist thing. And it's like really not fantastic, because no one expands the way they think or changes their perspective by being told, well, fuck you then. That should be reserved for when they're like, when you're done. I just fucking can't. Right. But you can't, like, we can't expect to not be perceived as prejudiced and classist and bigoted if that's exactly what we're being, right? If we are saying, you know, fuck the South, cool. So what exactly, like, what is the level of that you're saying? Like, fuck poor people? Like you said, fuck Black organizers, fuck everybody that's been doing this forever, and fuck their struggle, right? My optics and my privileges and my rights are much more important than these folks' struggle, or me even working to try and understand their struggle. And I think that in the South, I'm like teetering, I'm like right below the Mason-Dixon line. Class. And you can take class off, you can't take race off. And so one of the things that the system likes to do is play us horizontally against each other, right? So that we're not coming for the system, so that we're coming for each other. And that is absolutely what happens here. Because again, when you have like a third grade education, how do you expand bigger than that if no one's taking the time to talk to you, because you're not worth it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And remembering that it's not those communities' fault that that's all they have access to, right? Is that third grade education, or to, you know, work a minimum wage job, right? Again, it's like prejudice seems to be this like easy, like we label things every day as humans, right? And so it's like this easy way to just like point the finger and be like, I'm not going to spend any time thinking more critically about this. I just see you and I know you, the end. I put you in this nice box, like moving on with my day. And
because we lose people so much. Are full complex human beings.
Yeah. We lose opportunity to like meet new people, to have engaging conversations, to like build solidarity with folks who are interested and able in all of our struggles, right? Again, to Brandy's point, like even the folks like me, the middle class people, like when we're looking at the system that we're fighting against, like it's not benefiting anybody. Like, yes, I get more benefits and privilege and I am comfortable, but like I want that for everybody, right? And so to have the opportunity to like work with the folks that really do know what it's like to be on the ground and to struggle and to be like, yeah, I experienced this prejudice, I experienced this racism, I am fighting the system that like literally doesn't want to see me exist. Like being able to use my privilege and listen to how I could show up and support, like that's a powerful thing. And we just like don't have the opportunity when we just shut off and say, meh, this is the prejudice I have about you, like I'm done. I know we're eventually going to get into our harm reduction specific prejudice. I don't know if we're ready for that yet, but I've had a thing kind of bouncing around in my head. And I'm just going to say it, and somebody is going to be real upset. But I was thinking about how we were like, you know, fuck these people and fuck the South and this and that. Within some harm reduction spaces, but just in general, maybe more recovery spaces, adjacent-ish spaces, especially in the time of fentanyl, we hear a lot about fuck drug dealers, right? Fuck fentanyl dealers, fuck the people who are murdering the other people. And even for those of us who've done a lot of work around, you know, being like, okay, substance use harm reduction, I get that, people who use drugs, okay, but like the dealers, that's the line, right? And it's like, that's a prejudice, right? And we forget the conditions, right? The social conditions that create the need to risk a lot of things. You risk a lot of things when you decide to sell drugs. That's just the reality, because we live in a society that utilizes the war on drugs and the war on people who use drugs. So oftentimes there's a lot of overlap between people using drugs and selling drugs. And like selling drugs can be part of a survival economy. Again, back to that point of like, if you don't have access to resources, if you don't have access to education, to a job, if you have a criminal record because of the war on drugs, then this is your option, right? And you know, most human beings are not going into any job being like, I'm looking forward to accidentally killing somebody today. Like, no, no.
I mean, I don't know, probably maybe some
maybe
that is a prejudice.
Yeah. If we're talking about, we can talk about the military or law enforcement, but circling back, right, of like, if we don't take the time to see people as people first, if we have assumptions about what it means to be a drug dealer, then we can sort of have these ideas and prejudices that are completely devoid of like any kind of sympathy or critical thought for like the conditions in which this other human is also existing, and then like making these decisions based on that.
I absolutely agree. But I have a couple like people that are saying fuck the dealer, right? Are those folks so disconnected from either remembering the drug culture they were in or never having been in drug culture that they really think that the low-level dealers are making it? Like, yes, caveat, there are a couple, right? There's always a couple. But anomaly guy doesn't show up here in his anomaly cape and be like, this is true for everyone. That's not that we're not going to entertain anomaly guy here. Yeah, I don't know why. No. If you kill your clientele, that's a dumb business model. So why would business owners want to kill their clientele? Many of them are quite upset as well. And when having the opportunity, they will go get their quantity tested. Now, my thought about, fuck the dealer is a lot of times, especially after Reagan, who do we think of when we think of dealers? Because it has been like systematically pounded into our head that it's not a little white girl, is it? No. It is generally Black people or brown people. That's, a lot of times why white girls carry the bag. Because not only are we probably not going to get checked as much, but if we do, we're probably going to get probation unless you have like a rep sheet that's long. So I wonder how much of our like fuck the dealer within harm reduction is prejudice around race that we haven't explored. And I see some of our friends who use drugs that also are like, they need a life sentence. I'm like, are you sure your homie that you camped next to for 4 years needs to go to prison because the dude that he bought from 40 rungs down, now your friend needs to go to prison? I think that might be a bad plan. So basically, my thought around fuck the dealer is a lot of that resides around racism. And I truly think the systematic, like, cop law stuff around it absolutely stems from racism. But I have deep prejudice around all of that. I wrote that one thing that one time about the cops.
Oh, and it's, it's a complex thing. It's a very complex prejudice that we're talking about because people are dying, right? Like people are losing their friends and their family members. And again, it's easy to just point the finger, right? And not look at the sort of bigger structural issues that are resulting in so many deaths. And oh man, just went right out of my head again. Sometimes that happens. Maybe it'll come back. I'll give it a second. Just the point that people are suffering and they are sad, and like, oh, that was the piece. Autonomy, right? Oh my gosh, harm reduction. We value autonomy so much, and like, a regulated safe supply and decriminalization would help people stay alive because ultimately folks get to make the decision of what they do with their bodies, right? And so to say, fuck this dealer that killed my friend, it's like your friend, for better or for worse, made the decision. They decide, they're like, I'm an autonomous person. I'm going to do this thing. Did they maybe not know that they were going to get a shitty batch? Yes. And that sucks, right? And maybe it is on that dealer to do more work to say, hey, I'm going to really test my supply. I'm going to hand out supplies with, the drugs that I sell. I'm going to switch up a level from switch dealers up at a higher level. Like people can take care of each other, right? Like we can sort of have those discussions on how to better support one another, but ultimately, like, we have to give people that autonomy, which means like when we're trying to call for like criminalization or even murder charges for people who are selling drugs, like, I don't know, it's making me think about the like do not prosecute orders, that movement that was happening.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just think about if you are a person who feels like death by distribution is a good idea, it might be worth it to sit and think about the history of why those drugs are illegal and how that might play into what is happening today. And just, I don't know, sit and occasionally think drug dealer and what picture pops into your head. And if it is always a cute little white girl with pigtails, great. Great. Then the system has not gotten to you and you are magical. But if that's not what it is, maybe sit with that and use that to rethink or think on some of your positions. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, go easy on yourselves when you have these prejudices come up. I guess I said, like, it doesn't make you a bad person if you have them, and I'm not here to tell anybody that they're a bad person. It would be good if we all worked on them. We could be better people if, like, we acknowledge them and see them and say, okay, I'm going to work on that, right? Like, so we're trying to, like, invite people into this conversation, not trying to shame anybody. And, like, we definitely believe in, like, doing the work and making ourselves better so that we can show up in community in a positive way and not cause harm.
I also believe in failing and not hiding it. It's part of why I'm really fucking messy. Because not everybody's perfect. However, if you go through your prejudices and you're like, no, I dig being a racist bigot, I'm probably not going to be like, oh, you're such a good person.
Exactly.
Jessica might not. I'll probably
not to your face.
I probably will. Yeah, you will be a topic of conversation. Let's see what other harm reduction ones we have. Let's talk about drug exceptionalism. This one has pissed me off for a long time. Harm reduction is built around people who use heroin and opiates. And you could say it's not, even though it was born out of, like, the HIV movement and things like that. It is absolutely opiate focused. That's why there is minimal resources about stimulants, overamping, and legitimately, like, I've never hidden that I use stimulants, but they're my favorite. So, like, they're the ones that I'm like, this guy. But I also used opiates I was on Subutex for a long time, like 5 years, and I was at a conference, and I had stopped taking it because I had something happening in the near future that I wanted to be fully there for, without, like, I had to move. And so I was terrified of, like, not having access and all of the things. And so I stopped taking it, and it was day 4 and I was at this conference. I had never, like, detoxed off that before. So day 4, FYI, is wow. That's when it starts for the next 30 days. So I wasn't really in public very much, and there was a lot of things happening, and it was really overwhelming. And a very prominent person who is well known for opiate use, heroin use, texted me like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I can't. I am currently detoxing off of buprenorphine. And they said, oh, I didn't know you did the dope. I feel much better about you now. Something around, like, I feel like I can trust you. Does that make sense? And I said, yes, it absolutely does. And that was the last thing I said about that. Because, yeah, it sure did make sense, honey. It made very clear sense that you were reproducing the idea that tweakers can't be trusted, that all of the crap around meth users and somehow heroin users and opiate users are much more refined, I guess. I don't fucking know. They're just more and better. It was very clear, and now I have a deep-seated prejudice when I see this person, and a lot of times I have to take apart which part of my prejudice I'm holding.
And it, I have seen it working at a syringe exchange. I have seen the way that different participants, the things that they say, like versus, meth use versus heroin use, injection versus smoking, right? And it's like, hey, y'all, like, again, support each other, all community, like, you're all showing up here to, prioritize your health and well-being. And, like, your one experience with that person who uses meth, like, doesn't equate and mean that, like, every person who uses meth is this way, right? Or that they can't be trusted, or whatever that is.
There's the like like a person, what is it? Shit, it's been said to me so many times. Like, a tweer will steal your shit and help you look for it for the next hour. And that is how I feel in harm reduction. That is the underlying thought about us. And there is a elevation and sort of a romanticism of people who use heroin, and the rest of us are second. And I don't know if that's just me being pitiful, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the data is clearly showing that, methamphetamine use and polysubstance use is starting to lead to a lot more overdoses, or, and those substances are involved more in overdoses, not necessarily leading to. But so, like, there is a broader conversation around, like, how do we support stimulant users? And maybe that's not the case amongst, some of the more prominent folks or longer standing folks in the movement. I don't really know. But I know in the spaces here in California, and, that might be a California specific thing, like, there is such a focus on stimulant users, and we have some really strong advocates, especially in the Bay Area, that are, like, really pushing, like, stimulant users matter. Like, we need to be prioritized. We are dying also. We are having complications also. Like, our supply's fucked up also. Let's talk about it. So on this coast, it's happening, and I hope it happens where you are too.
I mean, this was the meth capital of the nation in 1992. Meth is the thing, and then pill mills came, and so, like, it's polysubstance, but there's a lot of meth, and I wonder if a lot of the exceptionalism within harm reduction, especially in, like, the spaces, right, and the peoples, if it's not some, like, latent classism, because meth is specific to a couple of populations, and it is working class white people, poor white people, and men who have sex with men, and sex workers. And so yeah, I wonder about that. Well, now I'm going to be stuck on that.
Something to explore more.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about also psychedelics.
That's always
the exceptional. Oh my god! Hello, that word.
exceptionalism. It's
yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Or, my MDMA makes me happier. My mushrooms are from the earth, and so, these drugs are good, and
your MDMA probably has meth in it. There has been, like, pure MDMA since, like, I'm not going to tell you the year.
Yes. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's problematic. It's problematic when we ask for decrim of certain drugs and not others, especially when we're decriminalizing drugs that literally are actually causing the least amount of harm or like are the most reliably safe, like not getting like an actual like a tainted supply, right? And so it's like, okay, cool. I was also thinking about my prejudice and like fucking festy kids, which I used to be one. So much prejudice against them for lots of reasons. Their drug exceptionalism, their cultural appropriation, which, you know, not all of them do that, but a lot of them.
By and large, we're white.
Yeah, exactly.
Most.
And so doing Molly, doing psychedelics, even doing like dissociatives, whatever, like we're having a party. Like, but if you bring like straight meth or fucking heroin to a festival or a rave, like you might get the shit beat out of you.
My friend
like,
overdosed and died because none of us wanted. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And in those rave spaces and those party spaces, right? Who is the group of people that can walk around looking like a blue fucking marshmallow with pockets full of drugs and like key bumping out in front of a goddamn concert? Who?
Yep. Me.
You look like this, and my friends that are not pink cannot. I'm like, girl, you're fucking stupid. I'm like, it's fine for me, right? For me, but then I'm also blowing them out of the water because my dumb ass feels safe, but they're like, bitch, I'm not safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the like total lack of fear. And I was always afraid to use drugs publicly because I'm just a baby. I'm afraid of everything. I'm like, please don't get me in trouble. But yeah, like all of my white friends are like, whatever. Like, no, they were just like, it's fine. And I'm like, I don't know. But they're right. It would have been fine. And it was always fine for me because I'm white.
I mean, drugs were not always fine for me, but I have a complete discontent for the law. And so I'm always like, what are you going to do? Give me more felonies? Great. But that in itself is a really privileged position, right? That probably only a very pink white girl with multiple felonies would feel like that, because how does this bitch keep getting felonies and not have like sentence upon sentence in prison?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my other social positions also added to my safety and the drugs not being a problem for me, right? Like I didn't grow up in a rural place. I didn't grow up poor. Well, I grew up on credit cards, but I had all the things that I needed, right? So it was fine. And yeah, so I grew up in a social circle that was more well off, and then I went to school and ended up in Santa Cruz where there's lots of money and status and
drugs. And drugs.
Yeah, and white people. But I was in a circle where all of those social positions and the whiteness did keep me safe, and probably some dumb luck too, because you
look really innocent, and you always have.
I know. Nobody would suspect. I mean, I also feel very lucky that I just like never, like, I have taken drugs from strangers. I have done them from off the ground. Like, I never knew to test my drugs. Like, dumb luck.
I don't even know how you would go to a rave or a party these days, and I just don't even know. I'm like, no, this was not okay. There was a point.
We were talking about stereotypes related to drug exceptionalism. I think we maybe made our point on that one. Are there any other prejudices we wanted to cover? or pieces that we're missing.
We have program exceptionalism and 12-step agents of state and holding two truths at once. Pick two.
Okay.
How about absolutely holding two truths at once?
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot about that the last few years.
Sometimes it's like 5 truths at once too.
What's the other one you want?
What is the other one?
You want me to read them again?
I think some of the ones that you mentioned were like examples of prejudice, like the tools of the state social worker one. Oh, I don't know. Let's do the program one. Program
exceptionalism. Mm-hmm. I think that is a good and prevalent issue within harm reduction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we talk about how like every community knows what it needs and it should look different, but then we gossipy, ugly commentary pick apart programs that aren't operating properly. Let's say there's a program that, for whatever reason, needs armed guards, right? That gets a lot of judgment, but one, is that yours to judge? Whose community are you in? Do you know that community? Are you a member of that community? And do you have privilege to be making that decision about that program? And what brought you to that decision? Are these prejudices? That was what I got there.
No, that's good. And I mean, I keep coming back to like the social conditions, right? Like if you are not from that community, or even if you are, but maybe you have a different experience because you have a different social standing or a different identity, like understanding why somebody might have to make that decision. Like we've had conversations around guns and drugs and guards at, harm reduction programs. And for our community and where we were at, we were like, nah, that's definitely not a thing that we fucking need. And it shouldn't happen. But we're not going to say,
no one should do it.
Right.
You're not doing harm reduction. Because we have had to actually do some shit that I intrinsically was opposed to. But, right, harm reduction is pragmatic, we say. And so it's very Spock-like, and the needs of many outweigh the needs of a few. And the needs of many are safety. And if the needs of a few, maybe it's violence, we're not going to keep them safe at the cost of all of the other folks that we serve. And so you have to do what you have to do. And the space of judgment isn't okay. And I will straight up say, I have been a judgy asshole myself. But as time goes on and I get examples of all of that, and then I'm like, oh, that's real yucky. Mm-hmm. Want to talk about the rural stuff?
Yeah. So rural living experiences, running programs is very different from urban metropolitan programs in access to resources, in engagement with law enforcement, in just being in a tiny ass place where everybody knows you, like,
and knows how to find you.
it knows how to find you. If you're a participant or somebody utilizing services, your face gets plastered all over the internet. Like, there's just so many things that are different than, having 5 programs to choose from in, a 5-mile radius, and like having actual confidentiality or anonymity, and having the funding and, all of the things. So, if you don't have that experience, if, even if you now live in a rural community, but, are maybe new, like, we don't want to tell people how to run their shit. Like, if you don't have the experience, and it goes for being in any other community, right, that like you are new to or just not from, like, if you do not have the experience there, like, things are getting done for a reason. Like, generally it is for safety. It is for the pragmatic reasons to like serve as many people as possible in the safest way possible. And like, yeah, sometimes that means you have to engage with and play the shitty politics game in your community, and that means your program is a 1-for-1, or you do have to engage with the police, or you only can be open on these certain days. And what?
Sorry. Were you there when Nursey? It just reminded me of a really funny story. I will write it down. You continue, and I think we'll end on the story. Sorry.
Okay.
Interrupt.
Okay. I mean, I think I'm basically there of just like, it's not like every program can't be the same, and as a movement, right, as like a harm reduction movement, like I get, sorry, I'm digressing, but my day job is to support programs, to support syringe exchange programs through a grant, to help them be better, right? To expand, to incorporate better, meaningful inclusion of people who use drugs, racial justice, and equity. But I have to also acknowledge that like people are in different types of communities. Some are rural, some are urban, and so like there is no like pedestal of the perfect program, and like everybody has to be this way. Like,
there is no gold star, you say?
There's no gold star. There are lots of people doing lots of amazing things that work for their community, right? That do prioritize the things that we say are important in harm reduction. But that doesn't make them better than anybody else. It just means that they have worked within their community to figure out what works best for them. Right? And yes, there are best practices. Like, there are things that show, like, this is how you reduce the most transmission of disease or overdose, right? So yes, we want naloxone saturation. Yes, we want enough syringes so everybody can have a sterile one for each injection. And if like literally it means not having a program at all, sometimes you have to figure out ways to do the best that you can, as close as you can get to best practices, but so that, again, you are still able to operate, period, and keep serving people at all, right? And because sometimes that literally is a program's option. Yeah, don't hold any one program up on a pedestal, and give people and programs the space to like operate the way that they know that they need to best serve their community.
That pedestal, it's dangerous for everybody on every side, because you can't be human. And if you weren't human, no one wants to hear the ways that maybe you need to improve. So, want to know what I was laughing about?
Yes.
Okay. So, were you there? Okay. Side note, Jessica and I ran the same program in a little rural, cute community. And we had a friend. She ran CareStream, but I call her Nursey. She helped build the testing program at that harm reduction thing. And one time, it was after the chief of police said I made a tsunami of needles happen. Right? So I was like, well, why don't you come over, look at our logbook? And it was when everybody was all up in like, oh, your numbers, your return rate. Like, you're bad at math.
You're padding your numbers.
Yeah. So the police came, the chief of police, and I was like, you can't bring your gun in here. And he was like, oh, but I can. I would like to say the sheriff was like, no problem, chief of police. But I mean, city police have an origin that is just trash. And so he was there talking with me, and Nursey comes in. And
I do remember
like,
the story.
Yeah, I was like, hey, Nursey, this is Chief blah, blah, blah. And she was like, oh, do you work for Sheriff Hansel? And he said, no, I'm the chief of police. And she was like, oh, they don't work for the sheriff? He was so mad. And like, I don't know about mad, but just like petty, bitter. And it was amazing. And I don't know if anyone else can feel how funny and how pleased I was with that. But it makes me very happy to this day. Because you don't offend police officers in their clothes very often, right? They don't show offendedness. Clearly I have some prejudice there. And so just to watch one be taken aback and like offended because he's not the bossy pants, or we didn't think he was the bossy pants, was just glorious. It was glorious. Maybe next time I'll have more funny story that other people can understand. The police loved me. He really, really loved me. And so all things like that happened in that program were really exciting.
That's sarcasm, friends.
Yeah. So I think that's episode 1. We have been blabbering for 2 hours, but we will cut that down to not 2 hours because we are not Joe Rogan.
Prejudice, maybe?
No, actually, there is a lot of prejudice, but I've actually listened to some of the things where people are like, I'm like, actually, that's not what I said. But
What's happening there?
So yeah. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. We don't know what episode 2 is going to be about, and we think it'll be in a while.
Yeah, we'll see how this first one goes and also how our time works out, but no later than a month from now.
Yeah.